This is Jim Cantelon Today Television. This is Bible Study for the 21st century. So welcome, friends, to JCT TV. A lot of you have been watching this now for a few years. Some of you are watching it for the very first time. Wherever you're coming from, wherever you may live, in North America or around the world, we're just delighted to be able to come your way. This program is very focused on the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, Acts, and John. And I just take my time. And right now, we are in Luke chapter 5. Jesus is about to choose some disciples. I'll be back with that right after this.
WOW works with local churches in needy countries. We mobilize those churches, pastors, and volunteers in a concerted effort to care for orphans and widows in their homes and villages. Through that strong faith-based platform, we're able to not only provide food, medicine, and crisis intervention, but we're also able to lead these afflicted ones to faith in God. It's powerful, humbling, and well worth the effort. Please support WOW with your generous gifts and faithful prayer. Thank you.
Last time, Jesus had just moved from Nazareth down to Capernaum, and he was beginning to demonstrate not only his tremendous teaching abilities, but also his healing abilities. He was already, if you will, becoming a bit of a celebrity, and things were just beginning to ramp up, but he was basically on his own at this point. But now we're going to see in Luke how not only does his popularity and his fame increase, but he begins to gather around him some key guys who are going to play a big role, not only in his 3 years of ministry, but also in the expansion of the gospel to the whole world in church history. So let's pick it up here in Luke chapter 5, verse 1. So it was, as the multitude pressed about him to hear the word of God, that he stood by the lake of Gennesaret. Now, Lake Gennesaret is the Sea of Galilee. In modern Israel today, it's called the Harp, if you will, in English, but it's basically got all kinds of names over the years. He saw 2 boats standing by the lake, but the fishermen had gone from them and were washing their nets. Then he got into one of the boats, which was Simon's, and asked him to put out a little from the land. And he sat down and taught the multitudes from the boat. And when he had stopped speaking, he said to Simon, "Launch out into the deep and let your nets down for a catch." Simon answered and said to him, "Master, we've toiled all night and caught nothing. Nevertheless, at your word, I'll let down the net." And when they had done this, they caught a great number of fish, and their net was breaking. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both the boats so that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish which they had taken, and so also were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on you will catch men." So when they had brought their boats to land, they forsook all and followed him. Now, this is an amazing story for a number of reasons, not the least of it being that Jesus was still fairly new on the scene vis-a-vis Capernaum and his ministry profile, if you will, as a teacher and a miracle worker. But what we see in this passage we've just read is that already Simon is calling Jesus Master, already referring to him as Lord, already in awe of what has emerged at this point in their short lives. And to the point, as we saw, and I'll get to it again, they actually forsake their fishing to follow Jesus wherever he wants to take them. I mean, this is really quite a transition period. So Jesus was preparing to launch his itinerary, as Luke will say in chapter 4, verse 44, to the synagogues of Judea, and the people are already pressing in on him. And this was par for the course for Jesus for 3 years. People pressing in on him. He had people opposing him in terms of the scribes and the Pharisees, but also the people wanting him to heal them. He was kind of like, in their view, a kind of a mobile medical clinic. So it was more than just pressing in to hear, but it was a physical pressing in, like you could get squashed. That's what the original language means here. So Jesus had to escape the large number of people on the lakeshore because they were pushing him into the water. So he hops into a boat, and it happens to be one of Peter's fishing boats. And he sits there a little bit offshore and he teaches. And as most of you know, back in 1981, I was invited by the Israeli government to plant a church in Jerusalem, which we did. You can Google it, King of Kings Church, Jerusalem. It's been quite the story, about 40 years now. But many, many times I was in the Galilee, not the least of it for the fact that I was driving up to the Galilee and then the upper Galilee into southern Lebanon once a week to broadcast with a Christian radio station in a war zone in southern Lebanon. But I was also there for many reasons. And then years later, after passing on the work to others that I'd trained, I was back in Israel doing a lot of television work. But I have stood on the shore of the Sea of Galilee time and time again. And as I say, it's the Lake of Gennesaret here. The modern Israelis call it Kinneret, which means harp. It's sometimes called the Sea of Tiberias, but it's the same lake. It's a very stony beach. It's a fairly sudden beach. And depending on whether or not there's drought, and many times there was drought when I lived there, the shoreline kind of recedes and it's very, very stony, very, very rocky. But the shore itself is anything but sand. It's stony, very, very stony. But the people were crushed, if you will, right up against the water on that stony beach. And Jesus then gets in Peter's boat and shifts out a few yards, and he's able to at least avoid the physical press, and he's able to sit there and teach. And there may have been several hundreds, if not maybe 1,000 or more people there, intent on his every word. And when he finished, Luke doesn't tell us how long he taught, but when he finished, he says to Peter, let's get out into the deep water. So, under mild protest, Peter agreed, because he'd been fishing all night with no success. So, he's probably a little bit, not just tired, but maybe a little snippy. But okay, on your word, he says, let's go. And they put out their nets, and they have such a huge catch, it actually is breaking the nets. And the response of Peter, James, and John, who were partners with Peter in this fishing enterprise, and those three eventually became known as the Three, capital T, the Three. You had the 12 disciples, but then you had this inner group of the 12 called the Three, and that's Peter, James, and John. James and John were brothers. Their father was also running some kind of a fishing enterprise. His name was Zebedee. But they see this humongous catch of fish, and after fishing all night, during the daytime, this just didn't happen. That's why they fished all night. It's much easier to catch fish at night than in the daytime. They interpret this as a miracle. And in this presence of the miracle worker, they feel unclean. That's interesting, huh? I could get into a bit of a preaching point here. I just suffice to say that it's been my experience, and probably yours too, that when you have a sense that you're in the presence of the holy, you yourself feel very unholy. And that was the case with these three. It was such a powerful, catalyzing, radical moment that they, even though they're fearful, as Luke says, they decided to drop their nets and follow Jesus. It was an historic turning point with with very, very far-reaching implications. So let's move on to verse 12. And it happened when he was in a certain city. Now, so I should say this. It's not just Luke who does this. I think, in my view, as I've studied and written, Matthew, Mark, Luke, Acts, and John commentaries, Mark may be the most prone to this, but you almost feel whiplash. It's like watching a movie with cuts, and depending on how good the editor is, you may or may not feel a certain measure of whiplash going from one scene to another. There's no kind of intermediate scenery. There's no transition sentences. It's just like bang, 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 bang. And this is the case here. So as it happened when he was in a certain city, we've gone from the shore of the Sea of Galilee and teaching from a boat and catching a whole bunch of fish to suddenly being in a certain city. And Luke doesn't tell it where it was. Behold, a man who was full of leprosy saw Jesus. And he fell on his face and implored him, saying, Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean. Then he put out his hand and touched him, saying, I am willing, be cleansed. Immediately the leprosy left him, and he charged him to tell no one. Go and show yourself to the priest and make an offering for your cleansing as a testimony to them, just as Moses commanded. However, the report went around concerning him all the more, and great multitudes came together to hear and to be healed by him of their infirmities. Now, this is most interesting. You see this leprosy thing here. If we were to look at this in terms of current realities, instead of leprosy, we'd write COVID-19. There was huge social stigma here. Even though their, medical knowledge was pretty primitive, they knew enough to know that you don't go into the presence of a leper. And their view was, like ours is with COVID, their view of leprosy was that it was transmitted through the breath. And so if you got within, breathing distance, if you will, of a leper, you were at risk of contracting leprosy yourself. And so lepers were persona non grata, to say the least, to the point where they had to live outside of the towns and villages and the cities. Many of them lived in caves, but they were literally social outcasts, okay? So Jesus is coming or being approached by this leper, and what happens, we'll have to leave for the next teaching segment. After the break, I want to come back and give you an update on some of the work that we're doing overseas with Working for Orphans and Widows. You see us promoting that on the program. And I just want to give you an update because a lot of you are interested in that. I'll be back with that right after this.
Assure you from the inside it is happening. God is our hope. God is all we believe in, this God. And he has called us to be the repairers of wars and to take care of the widow and the orphan in their time of need. And that is exactly what we do. Lives are changing. Why? Because Jesus is Lord. And why? Because Christians have come together as a body. The united body of Christ is coming and saying, it stops with this generation. We break it and we move on.
The kind of religion that God endorses is to care for orphans and widows in their distress, justice, and to keep oneself unpolluted from the world, righteousness.
You know, friends, I often say on JCT that we are the official voice of WOW. WOW stands for Working for Orphans and Widows. My wife and I established WOW 21 years ago, and it is a federal charity in both Canada and the United States of America. And we are involved on the ground with literally a few thousands of people in South Africa, Zambia, and Malawi, and South India. We have worked in other countries over the course of these 21 years, and in those cases have worked ourselves out of a job. We were also working in Zimbabwe at one point. We were working in northern Uganda. We worked for a short period of time in Mozambique. But in every case, in those countries, we were able to, if you will, transition our work to people on the ground and focus on other works that needed more, not just affirmation and leadership, but also funding. So that's what we're doing. We're working with orphans and widows. And just so you know this, the orphan and widow focus, to me, is fundamental. In the Psalms, we read that God is a father to the fatherless and a defender of widows in his holy habitation. Psalm 68, verse 5. When you go through the Old Testament scriptures especially, you see again and again that ground zero in terms of God's heart for the poor is the poorest of the poor, or as Jesus would put it, the least of these, and this is orphans and widows. Orphans and widows have no protector. Orphans and widows in most cases have no income. Orphans and widows have no one to defend them against exploitation, be it sexual or otherwise, and they are literally at the mercy of the elements and of the, as Shakespeare would put it, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. I mean, they're absolutely, they're not even on the bottom rung of the ladder. They're still on the ground. And many, many years ago when I was pastoring the church after I'd come back from Israel, the Lord really laid it on me that we needed to deal with orphans and widows in a major way. And so we started literally from scratch. So in 21 years, we've seen a lot of progress. I want to just give you a little update because I'm calling you to help us with working for orphans and widows. And JCT is the official voice of that. When you support WOW or JCT, it's one and the same. We are part of the same ministry organism, all right? We have two different corporations there, but we are a partnered corporation, JCT TV and wowmission.com. Okay, I want to show you just a few little updates that I hope will encourage you. This is the time of COVID. There is international concern. We have now more than 2 million people who've died from COVID-19. And in the United States, you've got more people COVID positive than any other country in the world. Canada is also suffering big time. And many other countries that are watching our program through the internet. Some of you are close to being shut down. Lockdown is part of our common parlance now, these days. And that's what it is for us on the ground in Africa and southern India. And here's one of our volunteers. And I wanted to show you this picture because not all of our volunteers are women. And you'll see on his t-shirt, it says, "Somebody Cares." That is our ministry in Malawi. Malawi is one of the poorest countries in the world. And we have this huge program. We're involved in 33,000 homes in Malawi. It still shocks me but this is the actual figure. I can hardly believe that's happening, but I've been there so many times, I know that it is happening. But here's one of our volunteers. We have 1,000 volunteers in Malawi, and several of them are men. Not all of them are men. Most of them are women, and many of those women are widows themselves. This, I think, is a pastor, as well as being a male volunteer. And what he's doing is he's preparing what we call a care package for some of our orphans and widows. That care package comes from bulk supplies like this. And here you see some of our other volunteers. They've just received this shipment, which has come to them from the ports. And I say ports, what we do is we either fly some material in, or it is purchased locally. In this case, what I'm looking at here with you are all local purchases. The big white sacks are full of nchima or mealie meal. It's ground corn meal, which is a critical component in the daily staple of most Zambians and most Southern Africans, really. And then in these bags in front of the mealie meal, you see these orange-colored bags. Inside of those bags are cooking oil and also salt and some bars of soap. And then to the left of the bags in these blue and white packages are, I think we'd call it 5 pounds of sugar. But those are some of the supplies that will then be transferred into care packages for our orphans and widows that we're caring for. There's been such a huge demand for masks, as you would expect, that we've had to make our own. And so we've trained some of our widows to make these very well-designed face masks. And as you can see from the gal herself, she's wearing a very colorful one. It's not all, surgical looking. Color is great in Africa, and more color, more better in Africa. But we're talking now thousands and thousands and thousands of masks that have been built or created in the last few months. Out in the field, and you got a literal field here. This is outside of one of the communities. The volunteers are there with some of their care packages in boxes, and they're just about to distribute them. So, and you'll notice that the man holding the box is masked, and the female volunteers who are about to distribute them will also put on masks. Before they go out into the villages and the surrounding rural areas, they gather together. You'll see them here, social distanced, of course, and the team leader is giving them final instructions and then also praying with them before they go out, because they're going to see some horrible things. And I've seen enough of these horrible things to know just how horrible they are. You'll go into a little, rondavel, little mud hut with a grass roof, with a mud floor, and there, maybe on a blanket, you'll see what looks like a 70 or 80-year-old woman who's in her final stages of life, and she might be 33, 34 years of age, absolutely ravaged by HIV and AIDS, which is still a pandemic, by the way, in sub-Saharan Africa, and dysentery, oral thrush, high fever, you name it. And these women, bless their hearts, go in, they put on a mask, and they try to stay as distant as they can, but at the same time, they have to prayerfully take risks, because some of these patients have bed sores. Some of them are befouled with dysentery, and they cannot care for themselves. And often as you go into that little rondavel, there'll be 2 or 3 little children, sons and daughters of this poor woman, who are watching, and you can tell that they're hungry and they're of course concerned about their mom. So these women, these volunteers here, are about to do some remarkable things. Getting back to the prep, you see this is COVID-19 preparation. This is hand sanitizers that they're putting together. You see that they're wearing masks. You see that they have gloves on. They're obeying the COVID protocols of their country, but they're also, very, very closely connected. And I showed you, this is a bit more of a close-up of those supplies now being handed out. This is one of the teams of volunteers who are about to go out. This is in Zambia, these volunteers. They're in front of a church. You see it's being constructed. You see the red steel beams there on the left of the picture with the it's a cement brick wall that's being built behind that. This volunteer group are connected with that local church. And I've made it very, very clear from the very beginning, 21 years ago, that we don't do any work with orphans and widows if it's not done with local church volunteers. I want these people who are being ministered to to know that they're being ministered to by local church people who love Jesus. This white guy, I stay in the background except for when I do pastors' conferences, when I cast vision for pastors to get involved and to generate volunteer teams like this. But these are the critical people, and without them, we're in trouble. Now, I'll be showing you some more next program, just to update you, and I'll try to do this, a couple of times each month, because I know that you're really interested in this. But let me just say this, friends. As I see it, we've got a double mandate here: righteousness and justice. With the righteousness factor, we're teaching the Gospels. And how can you even think in terms of fulfilling, the demands of God's laws and love for us, other than through the Gospel? So there's the righteousness focus, but then the justice focus is the care for the least of these, the care for the orphan and the widow. And that's why I have JCT and WOW in combination. I'll be back right after this.
Why dance when you have very little? When you live from day to day with food insecurity, rampant disease, sickness, and death? You dance because your heart is full of love for God and your hope is strong. WOW has come alongside as the hands and feet of the Lord, providing both home-based care and assurance of God's love. You're happy and you've got to dance. Please support WOW. Let's keep them dancing.
So further to that WOW update I just gave you in the last segment, we really rely on the support of God's people for this work. It's growing all of the time. We're dealing with close to 20,000 now orphans and widows. And that's all because kind, loving Christian people like you are hearing from the Lord and saying, this is a vehicle through which I can work to reach out to these poor, desperate people. You know me, you know our program. You trust me, I trust you. That's a no-brainer. And so together, we're good stewards, you're good stewards. Together we can literally change the world for these people that the Lord has led us to reach out to through the agency of local churches on the ground in sub-Saharan Africa and southern India. So thanks for your help. Anything you can do, really appreciate it. Be back next time. Looking forward to it. Bye for now.